Good evening, and welcome to the last installment of the League of Women Voters Education Fund Houston and League of Women Voters Education Fund Texas conversation with the candidates. My name is Darrell Douglas, and I'll hand it over to Miss Amy Mobley-Turney for announcements.
Hi, I'm Amy Turney. I'm Chair of Debates and Forums for the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. Rita Hicks is not with us tonight, so I'm filling in for her. I wanted to give y'all some important election dates. Next Monday, the 20th, is the first day of early voting. And then the last day to apply for a ballot by mail is Friday, October 24th. The last day of early voting is Friday, October 31st, and the last day that the county clerk can receive your ballot by mail is Tuesday, November 4th, and that's the same day as the general election. Now, when you're voting early, you can vote at any early voting location in Harris County. But on election day, you have to go to the polling location that you're assigned to. And if you have trouble finding that, you can give the League of Women Voters a call at 713-784-2923, or our website address is www.lwvhouston.org. You can also call the county clerk's office. Their telephone number is 713-755-6965. And the website address for them is www.harrisvotes.org. And the last piece of information I want to give you is the Secretary of State's office. And the reason is that we might have some viewers who don't live in Harris County. So you'd want to, the best number I can give you is the Secretary of State's office, and their telephone number is 1-800-252-VOTE, V-O-T-E. Their website address is www.votetexas, all one word, .gov. Thanks, Darrell.
Thank you. Tonight's conversation is going to start with a candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Robert Butler, sorry.
How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Why run for Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I believe in the sovereign power of the individual, to make the decisions that they need in their lives, both in the economic and social spheres, to make the best decisions for themselves. And I believe that the Republicans and Democrats don't represent that view. So I think that there's a voice that needs to be heard.
I'm going to ask one of our Voter's Guide questions.
Sure, please.
You only had, about 300 characters to respond with?
Yeah, they're hard to answer.
That's 2 tweets.
It is.
So under transportation, what measures do you support for Texas to meet its growing transportation needs?
Well, I think that we need an approach that helps expand our roadways. We need a way that does not increase the number of toll roads. I believe that toll roads, the way they're conducted here in Texas, are unfair for the voters. We're paying for, these roads to be built, and then we have to pay for them again when we use them as tolls. They're unfair monopolies. They're owned by foreign companies. There's just a list that goes on and on about how unfair the financing is regarding toll roads. So I want to see us move back more to freeways. I also want to see us, open up the markets. We had a problem in the last legislative session where Tesla wanted to sell cars directly to the people and not use dealerships. The dealership system was created back in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. We think it's time to move on and allow people to innovate, allow people to create cars that drive themselves. I believe that that's a big way we can cut down on traffic. When I talk to, I'm from Austin, and when I talk to the local folks there about the planning, 20, 30 years from now, have you incorporated driverless cars into your plans? No. They looked at me like I was kind of crazy, even though Tesla introduced last week that they've got a driverless car. Google has a driverless car. The automobile industry is just waiting for the legislatures to catch up so that we know who has financial responsibility in case of accidents and things like that, because obviously the driverless cars are a new way for people, and we need to figure out how that will work legally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to segue off that question. And what do you think about our Texas Department of Transportation?
Well, I believe that the toll roads were really kind of a scheme to finance roads without increasing taxes. I think it was a bad idea then, it's a bad idea now. So we need to move off of that. We need to, we have a growing population here. We have many people moving daily to Texas. We need to accommodate for that growth. And I think that building roads, building highways are something that governments can do. And they need to finance them through, different ways. And that's another possible, problem that's coming up in the future is how do we fund our roads when people may not be using gasoline? So we need to be forward thinking on that.
Thank you. Darrell?
You talked about the need to build infrastructure and continue to build roads. With Texas being one of the fastest growing states, if not the fastest growing state, and the expansion of the Port of Houston, where will that money come from?
Well, one thing that is really great about Texas is that we're blessed with a lot of natural resources. A lot of the growth in revenue is coming from our oil and gas industry. And the oil and gas industry is using our roadways to a greater extent than ever before. So we need to make sure that they are paying for their share of their use. We need to make sure that other commercial drivers are paying for their fair share as well. We need to make sure that we continue to think about the future because we do know that the demographics are changing. We have a lot of growth happening, and we don't want to be stuck in traffic all the time.
I still want to stay on transportation.
Sure.
We have, there will be a ballot item concerning the rainy day fund.
Yes.
And I'd like your opinion on that because the rainy day fund has grown comfortably in Texas.
Yep.
And do you think the state's been too reluctant to use it is one part of the question, but the other is concerning this ballot item, I'd like to know how you feel about it and whether or not you think that it's my understanding that the reason that this is on the ballot is because the oil companies are sending their trucks out into areas now that it's causing damage to the road. So should we be using the rainy day fund for this, or should the oil companies be getting taxed for this? So what's your opinion on that?
Well, a lot of the rainy day fund money does come from the oil and gas industry. So I think it's right to shift. I think that there's definitely a need to maintain a rainy day fund, but we need to shift dollars into where they're needed the most. And infrastructure like roads, as you mentioned in the rural counties, that it's unfair for them to be paying this whole amount themselves. So we need to help out. We need to make sure that the roads are well maintained for the safety of our people, but also for the industry. Oil and gas is providing a lot of tax dollars for our state. So they need to be directed toward how they're being used.
Great. Thank you. Darrell?
So let's just say, Mr. Butler, things go your way, and January you're our new lieutenant governor. For the 2015 legislative session, what would you say would be one of your top priorities?
Well, one of our highest priorities is to make sure that we cut spending so that we can continue the growth that we've seen. One of the things I'd like to show you, and I won't do a Ross Perot and pull out my charts, but we have 14% of the budget being spent on business and economic development. That's also known as Rick Perry's slush fund to his friends that contribute to his campaign, and we need to cut things like that out. And there are things like that can be immediately cut. Businesses should come to Texas because we're a great place to do business, not because we dole out favors.
I'm going to give you another League of Women Voters question.
Please.
So this is on education. An educated workforce is one of the building blocks of responsible job growth. What measures do you support to improve our public education systems?
We spend way too much money on bureaucracy in Austin. We need to make sure that money is being spent at the school classroom level. I myself ran a private school that taught English classes when I lived in Mexico. And I know that when you don't have a lot of bureaucracy, when you don't have a lot of administrative overhead, you can spend more money and more focus on the children. It happens that, libertarians disagree on whether or not we should have public funding for schools in the first place, but our Texas Constitution says that we are required to do so. We need to make sure that money is being spent the most efficient way possible. We also need to make sure that parents are choosing where to send their children. My brother, for example, lives in Florida. In Florida, he's allowed to decide which public school in his school district he sends his children to. And so it helps create competition, and it helps stimulate productivity. It helps stimulate the teachers. They're rewarded when they do better, and so we should do that. I also believe that we need to cut out the amount of testing that we currently have. I don't believe that testing is the answer to solve all of our problems. Students progress at different levels. Teachers need flexibility in order to best teach their students, and holding them to a rigid standard doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Thank you. Darrell?
Mr. Butler, if elected, you'll be expected probably to work across two other party lines.
Certainly.
With the lieutenant governor being, if probably like the strongest person in the process, being that we have a weaker governor, how would you use that to your advantage? How would you work across both party lines in order to bring?
Well, one of the unique things about the Libertarian Party is that we can agree with Republicans very often on budget issues, economic issues, property rights issues. We can agree with Democrats many times on civil rights issues and on the criminal justice system. We need a lot of reforms there. So I can agree with both parties on different issues, and I hope that that brings out the best in both. I believe that libertarians, that's one of the great things about libertarians, is that we have with a very small minority in the legislature, we could shift things one way for economic values. We can shift things another way on social values. Things like gay marriage, legalizing marijuana. Those are things that libertarians can push us over the top and create more freedom in the state of Texas. So we definitely have issues that we can work with on both sides.
Thank you.
How many Tier 1 universities do you think Texas should have?
Well, I think that we're fine the way that we are. I don't see that that's something that needs to be a high priority right now. If the universities decide that they want to pursue that, I would rather give them more freedom and more flexibility to do what they want to do, rather than have it dictated from Austin.
So then when the voters approved Proposition 4 in 2009 to establish the National Research University Fund, that would help us get more Tier 1 universities.
Yeah, I'm not against it, but it's not something that I advocately support either. I'm really pretty neutral on that topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Darrell?
So you say you're neutral there. What would you say, and as far as legislatively, would you say is your top issue to address first?
Well, again, we've got some criminal justice issues that I haven't mentioned yet. One of the things that we can do is legalize marijuana in the state of Texas. I think that's something that is going to happen within the next 4 to 6 years, if not sooner. There could be medical marijuana passed even this legislative cycle. We need to end the chain, of poverty that often happens when people get arrested for minor crimes. Many people don't know that I helped a lot with the public relations on the Jacob Bavaro case. We recently, we had a person in Round Rock, Texas, where I'm from, was arrested for baking marijuana brownies. He's 19 years old. We didn't think that he should spend the rest of his life in prison for such a small incident. And so we want to fight to help protect those people, make them productive citizens again. We also need to legalize same-sex marriage in Texas. First I should say that the stance of the Libertarian Party is that we really need to get the state out of the marriage business completely. It isn't something that we should decide at the state level how people arrange their families. There's a lot of new ways and a lot of unconventional ways that people are arranging their family situations today, and the state needs to get out of the marriage business. Why do I need to ask permission from the state whether or not I can get married? Now, I did ask my wife's parents for their permission, but I don't see why I should have to ask the state for that.
So on that note, with the constitutional amendment that was passed a few years ago, would you were talking about about gay marriage being legal, would you try to push for another law to overturn that, or would you rather wait for the courts?
It looks like the courts are going to take care of it soon without us. But what I would like to do is formalize the idea that we do not need marriage licenses in Texas. So that is something we can do legislatively. Now, if somebody wants to get a certificate of marriage, like they get when someone is born or when someone dies, wouldn't it be nice if you had to ask permission from the government to die? But the government does issue a certificate to say, hey, this is what's happened. It's a legal thing, for everyone who's a debtor, creditor, those people. But we can do the same thing for marriages. We can issue a certificate saying that people are married. But to ask for the government's permission, it just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Darrell?
So education has been a big issue, and I heard you talk a little bit before about the way we fund things.
Mm-hmm.
What are your views on the current state of Texas public education, K through 12?
Well, it's definitely something that needs improvement, and I think that the way that we do that is to return control to the local school districts, to the local schools as much as possible, and even to the parents. The parents are the ones who know what's going on with their children the best, and so do the individual teachers. And so I think that's where we need to have more decision-making power, not in the Texas Education Agency or in other places. We need this idea that an elect group of people get together and decide what our books are all going to be and how we're all going to learn together. I think it doesn't make sense in this day and age. I think that we need to be more flexible. We need to be more innovative. And we're being held back by the bureaucracy in Austin. And not to mention all the money that it costs for these bureaucracies to work in Austin. So I'd rather see that money go to the local level. And if we're able to make cuts because of the bureaucracy getting smaller, that's great. But I want to see more money being spent locally and have that under the decision-making power of the parents.
I'm going to talk about agriculture.
Sure.
I know that we're not in what people would consider an agricultural area, but actually Harris County does have quite a bit of agriculture. And there was a bill passed in 2011 regarding urban agriculture that was unfunded, but could have been quite productive here in Harris County. It's the second largest industry in Texas. So what are your plans for ensuring agriculture's ability to continue to prosper?
Well, regarding urban agriculture, I believe that people, again, we need to change some of these laws that limit people's ability to grow their own food. We need to change the laws that will let people to buy and exchange their food, at local farmers markets and local neighborhood markets. We need to increase their ability to do that. Things like raw milk, for example. As long as it's properly labeled as raw milk, we should be able to sell it. We should be able to buy it. People should have the decision on what they eat and how they grow it. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. I know a lot of people who would like to take that power back. They don't want to just go to the supermarket. They want to grow their own food, and it's healthy. It's local. It's better for the environment. So why don't we let them do that?
Well, yeah, I was going to say I do grow my own food.
Well, there's some limits.
Am I breaking the law?
There's a limit. Well, there's limits on how you can grow your own food if you're going to sell it in particular.
I see.
And so that's really where the limits come in, is when you're talking about commerce.
Okay.
But yeah, you can certainly have your own vegetable garden. But there are limits on what you can grow in some places, or what animals you can have, things like that.
Right.
Or try to sell raw milk. They might lock you up for that.
Right. I don't think we can have roosters in Houston.
Yeah, you probably can't have roosters. That's something that usually happens in city limits. But so that is something, again, that we need to look at on a case-by-case basis. Does it make sense, to have these laws, or can we get rid of some of them?
Okay. Thank you. Darrell?
Just to piggyback off of what you just said, what are some of those laws that you think need to be taken away from the state level?
Regarding urban agriculture?
Yeah.
Well, there are people I know in Austin who have run into difficulties, especially when they want to sell their produce. They need to meet certain standards, and they also need to show where it was grown, and there has been a lot of issues there. I'm not an expert on it, I have to tell you the truth, but I know that there are people who run into problems, and I've seen that. And so I want to look into it more and help straighten that out so that they can sell legally with what they make, or to barter. There's also a very active barter system. We shouldn't get in the way of that either.
I'm going to give you the last voter's guide question.
Okay, great.
It's regarding health care. According to the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, about 1 million uninsured United States citizen adults below the poverty line in Texas do not qualify for affordable coverage through either Medicaid or the health insurance marketplace. Would you consider negotiating with federal Medicaid officials to pursue a Texas solution to close the coverage gap?
Well, I don't believe that money is the problem in the healthcare business. I believe that the problem is regulation. And we have seen, just recently in the last year or two, for example, I'm very familiar with some of the hospitals that operate in Austin. I have family that work at some of those hospitals, and they've had to cut back on some of the care that they give people who can't afford to pay because of the requirements under the new laws, new federal Obamacare laws. And so, we have to keep in mind that healthcare was a lot cheaper before these federal laws took place. The idea is that we need to make healthcare affordable. So how do we make healthcare affordable? We make it affordable by taking away some of these regulations from the insurance industry, by taking away regulations from the federal industry. For example, a lot of people don't know the federal government controls when and where a hospital can open its doors in a lot of states. Imagine if the federal government could control when and where they open a Starbucks. Would there be a Starbucks on every corner? No. I'm glad to see that there are some affordable options opening up. For example, Walmart has decided that they're going to have a nurse practitioner at every store coming soon. We need to encourage that kind of innovation. There's a city in the Midwest, I think it's Kansas City, that is now sending a nurse practitioner with every ambulance so that they don't have to come to the emergency room if it's just an earache or a throat infection. There's ways to cut spending without increasing the size of the system. Unfortunately, I think that it comes from good intentions. People need health care for sure, and we need to provide that access to health care. We need to make it as affordable as possible. The way we do that is we get the government out of it, and we also get the insurance companies, because some of these major insurance companies have rules and regulations that are even worse than the federal government. So that's the way I envision it. I'm looking at a healthcare system that has not been free. We have not had a truly free healthcare system since 1910. The AMA, for example, they do a lot of things that helps restrict the amount of doctors that we have. There's only a certain number of residencies that are available. There are people who've studied to become a medical doctor. They can't get a residency. They have to wait, and that puts a limit on the number of doctors that we have. So we need to stop limiting the growth of healthcare. We need to allow the industry to innovate and come up with better ways to bring affordable healthcare. If you look at things that are part of the healthcare industry that are not regulated as much, for example, cosmetic surgery, also LASIK eye surgery, those things are not regulated. The price of those operations has gone down every year. So we know that we can drive healthcare costs down, and the way to do that is to stop over-regulating them.
Thank you. Durrell?
You were speaking a little bit earlier about the non-need, I guess, for some of the state agencies, some of them not being necessary.
Right.
Which would you cut first if you had the?
Well, there are a lot of agencies that do valuable public functions that could be spun off maybe into nonprofit agencies. So, for example, our department that manages parks in Texas, could we maybe spin that off and create a nonprofit organization that could manage our parks? That's the way, for example, some parks are managed in Mexico. When you visit the monuments down there, different Mayan ruins, a lot of those are managed by a nonprofit organization. So can we do something like that? Those are things we need to look into. We also need to reduce some of these things. For example, criminal sentencing. If we change criminal sentencing, a lot of these marijuana and other drug laws that are for nonviolent offenders, we can cut down the amount of money that we spend in our criminal justice system and maybe move that into something that'd be more productive, or cut taxes.
The Constitution names the Lieutenant Governor to a 5-member legislative redistricting board in the event that the Texas legislature is unable to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. We have several libertarians in our party that have a great plan on redistricting, and my idea is similar to theirs, which is I would like to see it done by computer without politicians getting involved. I don't know if that's possible, but it's something I would like to see. I think that there are computer mapping systems that the politicians currently use to cut up these gerrymandered districts that we've seen. They're always so strange looking, to give favor to some and take away from others. Usually what they try to do is, in this case, is give the Republicans the most amount of seats and concentrate the number of Democratic voters into smaller areas so that they have a smaller number of seats. That same software can be used to create districts at random that are contiguous, that make sense, that follow city boundaries or county lines, so that districts actually make some sense.
Thank you.
So that's what I would like to do. I don't know if it's possible, but I think that we can make a step in that direction to maybe take people out of the process a little bit.
Thanks. Terrell?
The League of Women Voters does a very good job getting increasing civic engagement and voter engagement. What ways do you think, as Lieutenant Governor, you could work with organizations, and how would you use your power with the state in order to do so?
Well, getting more people involved in the process is something that I'm very passionate about. It's one of the reasons I got involved in the first place. And what I would like to see, and I agree the League of Women Voters does an excellent job, what I would like to see is proportional representation. Most democracies around the world that use democratic elections have proportional representation. And what that means is that every vote is counted. So if you're part of a small party that only gets 5% of the vote, you get 5% of the members of your local parliament or district. So in this case, the state legislature would be, 5% Libertarian or 2 or 3% Green, however the votes break down. And what that does is it empowers people. It says, well, we mentioned earlier the gerrymandered districts. That takes away that advantage of the gerrymandered districts, because if 55% of the people vote Republican and 45% vote Democrat, and then there's maybe another percentage, or I probably did 100% there, but you know what I mean. Each percentage is represented in the legislature according to how the statewide vote totals look, not according to how the districts have been gerrymandered. So that would take away some of the incentive to create gerrymandered districts in the first place. So proportional representation is something I'd like the League to look into. Make every vote count.
Thank you. Also, one of the responsibilities of the Lieutenant Governor is that the Lieutenant Governor is the chair of the Legislative Budget Board, who also in turn makes appointments to that board.
Yep.
What qualifications, how would you determine who would be appointed to that board?
Well, I believe that there are some very serious legislators who are not very partisan, who I think would do a good job on the board. I also believe that there are people who work in the private sector. I believe that there's, nonprofit organizations that are currently studying how to, change the budget. So I think that from academic life, from the nonprofit world, from some of the local folks who are in office already, we can draw that talent. But what I'm most interested in is looking at people who understand how the economy works. And so, right now we have a lot of people who are Keynesian type of economists. What I'd rather see are more people who understand how the market works, how the free market can take care of a lot of the problems that we have today. And so I would be looking at those free market think tanks and other people for help.
Thank you. Jarrell?
So we want to thank you so much, Mr. Butler, for coming here. And we want to give you this opportunity to talk to the folks at home and tell them why they should vote for you.
Well, again, I believe that the two-party system is failing us. Both Republicans and Democrats fail to respect the voter for who they really are, for adults who are able to take care of themselves, who are able to manage their lives. I believe that we need to remove the government from as many of our, lifestyle choices and economic choices as possible. We need to allow innovation to take place. We can be a prosperous and free people, but we need to reassert our power over the government. We need to remember that organizations like the TSA cannot come to our state and violate our Fourth Amendment rights. We need to remember that things like no-knock raids and discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation are things that we should be against. And we can overcome the obstacles that have been put in our path. We can reform the system. We can make government better. We need to make sure, though, that every vote counts. And that's why I do support a proportional representation system. We need to make sure that we reform our criminal justice process. We need to reform education so that our decision-making power returns back to the parents. And these are things that we can do to make Texas a better place for everybody.
Again, thank you so much, Mr. Butler. And at home, stay tuned for the next candidate. Welcome back to the League of Women Voters, the conversation with the candidates. We're now talking to Mr. Ron Hell, who's running for Texas Senate District 15. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Hell, why run for the Senate?
Well, it's time for new leadership. The current incumbent has been in office for 30 years and has become a one-issue candidate.
What's his one issue?
Criminal justice system. And there are some improvements that need to be done, but the improvements that he's done over the past decade have caused 2 cities in Texas to go bankrupt. So there's more than just closing prisons and keeping people out of the prison system. An issue that has come up this year, and looks like the Texas Senate and House legislatures are both going to take up the issue of decriminalization of marijuana. So to help improve the justice system and take more people out of our prison systems who have not committed acts of violence and just have possession charges. So it's about improving our justice system and having more people stay in the communities where they're from and still be, you know, good assets to the community. You know, when you make a mistake when you're 18 to 28 years old, and you're in college, you experiment, and you know, we shouldn't put people in prison for a law that was written over 100 years ago that was basically written on the premise of a law of it being a poison, and turns out it's not a poison. And you know, it's prohibition was set up to improve the way the country was going and the direction of America, and a lot of lies were told throughout the history. And you know, it's about making a better community, and you know, not putting people in prison because you know they want to make a profit on a plant they can grow in their yard because the government can't tax it. We look at what California and what Washington have done with their initiatives and legalization. They have created a basic system of seed to stem to selling to the general public, where they actually have created tax revenue from the plant. So the government from 1906 to now has finally figured out a way to actually, you know, tax something that you can grow in your own backyard. I know that a lot of farmers markets have the same problem. There's a lot of people who grow plants in their backyard, tomatoes, watermelons, pumpkins, and they go to farmers market and they sell the products. It's about making it in this country, and we have an American dream of you should be able to, work for yourself and be able to provide for your family. So, we want to keep less people out of the prison system, and that is a goal of mine too, but that's not the only issue.
Public education has been a huge issue here in the state of Texas. In your opinion, our current K-12 education system in Texas, is it fully funded? Does it need to be better funded, or are we spending too much?
I think depending on the area, whether it's rural or where it's inner city or it's out in the suburbs, education has different funding needs. That's why I believe in school of choice, and the tax dollars should follow each student. It's time for Texas to get away from standardized testing. When you go to school, you're there to get an education, learn history, math, science, and move on to college. You take SATs, you take the ACT to be able to get into college. When you get to the university or community college that you're going to, you have to take an entrance exam when you get there anyways. Most of the time, colleges don't actually look at your STARS tests. I think it's STARS now. It was tax tests when I was in school, and we only took it in the 10th grade. And it wasn't a requirement that if you failed it, you couldn't graduate. So putting an extra burden on students who, might live at home with a single parent to, go to work to help their family out with money, to give them this extra burden of worrying, if I don't pass this test when I'm a sophomore in high school, I'm not going to graduate. There's already kids who are complaining about it because they're seniors in high school and they're bad test takers. Not everybody can take tests well, so, taking standardized testing out of the schools and allowing the teachers to get back to educating the children is a goal that I want to help the State Board of Education with.
I'm going to give you a League of Women Voters guide question.
Okay.
Because the amount of characters you had to respond was about the equivalent of 2 tweets. So, do you support the regulation of payday and auto title loan lenders, including closing the loophole in state law that allows these lenders to charge Texans 500% and more in interest?
Yes, I think that they should be regulated just like banks. The banks, when they give you a loan, they have mandated amounts that they're allowed to give you to refinance a vehicle, to refinance your home. These payday loan places, you go in and it's a great deal. They can give you cash right there. And $5,000 cash to some people these days it's a lot of money, and it helps them with the bills that they have, helps them with the medical bill, it helps them with getting their car repaired. And then when it comes to paying that money back, paying 500% on $5,000 is just ridiculous. It puts them further in debt. Our nation's dream is not to be in debt, it's to be self-sustainable. And, these businesses need to be regulated because they're basically loan sharks.
Thank you. Darrell?
I'll go to another voter's guide question. The last legislative session took steps to address the issue of state funding for mental health services, resulting in Texas moving from 49th to 45th nationally. What will you do to build on this progress and ensure that Texans have access to mental health care services?
Improving the system that we have now is great. A lot of the mental health facilities in Texas were closed decades ago through policies that were enacted through the state legislature, and it's time that we give the people the help they need. Whether it be working with nonprofits to help fund those facilities, whether it's finding the money inside of the state legislature somewhere in the budget to put it into the medical facilities would be a great first step.
Tell us your qualifications.
Well, for 17 years, I've been the engineer at a private security firm. We work with homeowners associations and civic clubs. So on a daily basis, we deal with the needs of gated communities, whether it's their water needs, whether it's drainage on property, whether it's security on property, just about everything that you basically need at home. That's what our company does. On the second aspect of that, I have 10 employees that work under me that I've trained, that I've shown them, the steps they need to go through to become licensed in the private security industry, and, having that part of ethics to work in the private security industry, because you need to be trusted by people to go into their homes when they're not there. It's having that type of an ethical background and having the experience of 17 years working with communities all across the city of Houston, Humboldt, Atascocita, Baytown, all the way Austin, Dallas, down in Brownsville, and even in El Paso. I've worked all across the state. So it is, all those qualifications, I think, bring me to the point where, I think looking at the laws, I could, help to improve it to make people's lives better.
Very good. And if you could take 1 minute and talk to the folks at home and tell them why you deserve their vote.
Well, I'm Ron Hale, running for Texas Senate District 15. I deserve your vote because I'm going to work to pass school of choice and standardized testing in our public schools and in the private schools. I also want to help design and fund the Texas leg of the border fence to help our immigration system. I want to make sure that we get clean drinking water to ranchers and city folk alike. And last, I want to help work to lower property taxes with the ultimate goal of eliminating property taxes in Texas. You can find out more about my campaign at ronhalefortexas.com. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hale, for your time. Stay tuned for the next candidate. Welcome back to the League of Women Voters Conversation with the Candidates. We're going to go to our next candidate, the current incumbent senator, Texas State Senator from Senate District 15, Mr. John Whitmire on the line. Good evening, Senator.
Hey, good evening to you and your listeners.
Senator Whitmire, what made you decide to run for another term?
A lot of unfinished business, a lot of challenges. The state needs to prepare for our tremendous growth. A lot of our current needs are not being met in the area of our infrastructure, our education system. I could spend the rest of the evening talking about some areas that need focusing on. But largely, the experience I have in my seniority will be used on behalf of my district and our greater Houston area, because we're going to have like 8 new senators, freshman senators, new lieutenant governor, new attorney general, new governor, and it's going to be really good if I'm fortunate to get reelected to have experience. I'm the longest serving senator, chair criminal justice, sit on finance. So that seniority will go to creating a better Texas for my district in the greater Houston area.
Thank you.
Senator Whitmire, I would like to ask you one of our Voters Guide questions.
Sure.
Local governments are currently prohibited by state law from using fair market value or sales price to establish the value of commercial property tax for ad valorem tax purposes, thereby shifting a higher portion of the tax burden to homeowners. What do you believe should be done to ensure that property tax valuation process fairly balances the interests of both residential and commercial property owners?
Well, first of all, as you probably know, the appraisal district will come put a value on your home. They literally drive down the street. But I represent the Exxon refinery plant in Baytown. They get to submit their own values, and I could suggest other major commercial enterprises. So we need some equalization of just pure the value placed on property as it's currently instituted. Homeowners are realizing the burden. And let me tell you another issue in relation to that. Every time we give a tax abatement to attract additional businesses, guess what? Guess who picks up the difference? There's nothing fair or equal about property taxes. We need to find an alternative. And I know some of the candidates for lieutenant governor are speaking in that regard, but their issue would be they want to turn to a higher sales tax, which I think is regressive and would not support. But back to your initial question is, we need truth in taxation. We got to have people, whether it's homeowners or businesses, being fairly appraised.
Thank you. Darrell?
Senator Whitmire, what would you say are your top 3 priorities going into the next legislative session?
Got to find the proper funding for public education. For certain, we're tied up in the courts. We have not properly funded public education probably since I got to Austin. It's just, we have 1,040 school districts. Each one of them depend on local property taxes. We've got to get away from that and have the state take a greater responsibility for public education. It's actually one of the requirements of our state constitution to have a free and equal public education system. We haven't had one in anyone's memory. So public education, our infrastructure, our highway system has got to have an increase in funding. I hope everyone will vote for Proposition 1, which will put $1.7 billion into our highways, but that's only a start. Social services. We're badly inadequate in nearly every facet of social services, particularly mental health. And I could go on and on. The criminal justice system, we've made some great reforms, but we've got a lot of work left to do, particularly with the mental health. You can't continue to incarcerate or jail people because they have a mental health issue and they have an altercation with someone or law enforcement, which leads to their being confined. They need to be treated as mental health patients. So that's the top 3 or 4, but I have many, many other areas that need to work on. College tuition is getting out of out of control. We need to get back and not allow our universities to just totally make college unaffordable for many of our students.
Thank you.
Another voter's guide question. The last legislative session took steps to address the issue of state funding for mental health services, resulting in Texas moving from 49th to 45th nationally. What will you do to build on this progress and ensure that Texans have access to mental health care services? It seems to me that we're keeping mental health patients in jails and prisons as opposed to mental hospitals.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it's been a high priority of mine for years. As chairman of criminal justice, I have spoken loud and clear about the number of people incarcerated because they were not treated for their emotional mental health issues. I teamed up with Joan Huffman last session, and we have a pilot project that started in Harris County Jail September 1. We put $5 million in it each year to demonstrate how effective it would be. When you're booked at Harris County now, we have mental health professionals who give you an analysis, a diagnosis, and if you're suffering from a mental health condition, you go into a mental health system that will actually lead to the mental health court. So making people and the legislators aware of the circumstances is critical. We have 150,000 people incarcerated tonight at 108 prisons. Recently, we documented 32,000. This is significant. 32,000 of our inmates were in a mental health program before they ever committed a crime. But because of lack of funding, lack of counseling and assistance, they committed a crime, and now they're incarcerated. It would be the humane, the moral right thing to do to give them their mental health services, but it would also save millions of dollars. So the mental health system, certainly as it relates to criminal justice, is probably my highest priority. I go everywhere I go. I don't care if I'm talking about water in West Texas. I will include a mental health component to talk about the need for greater mental health funding.
Thank you. Darrell?
Senator Whitmire, I actually used to work for TDCJ for a number of years in the institutional division, and I noticed in my last years there that there have been tremendous budget cuts, and when it comes to hiring the best and the brightest to work for TDCJ, that's often a challenge. Providing adequate salaries for some of our state workers.
Sure,
with TDCJ and across the state. That's usually one of the first places that people go when there are budget cuts. What outside of the box ideas would you have to increase revenue or to hold the line in certain places to provide more for state workers?
Well, let me tell you, the good news and maybe even the bad news is we're going to have more resources, more revenue than we ever anticipated when we adjourned last session because of the Eagle Ford shale oil production, our excise taxes. We're going to have significant more revenue. The bad news is a lot of the new members, these 8 newly elected senators, are already saying they don't want to spend it. You know, the rainy day fund probably has $8 billion in it as we talk. When we started that rainy day fund in 1988, we sat around and said if we could ever get it to $300 million, we really had a good rainy day fund. It's approaching $8 billion, so we've got to use that money wisely. Infrastructure, but certainly for state employees. Our ability to attract and keep people, whether you're talking about teachers or correction officers, suffers severely because we just don't pay livable wages. So certainly the correction officers is a priority. One of the problems is we built the prison against my opposition in most of the wrong places. You need to raise the standards for the employment. You need to give them the benefits, but it's going to be tough to attract sufficient numbers when you're talking about some of the smallest rural communities in Texas. But I agree with you. It's important that we have qualified, well-paid correction officers, and quite frankly, parole officers, probation officers, state employees in general.
Another voter's guide question, Senator. Do you support regulation of payday and auto title loan lenders, including closing the loophole in state law that allows these lenders to charge Texans 500% and more in interest?
It's outrageous. It is criminal. I've joined Wendy Davis. A group of us led the charge last session. The industry, the payday lender, the car loan industry, title industry, tried to have a watered down state regulation. I was very outspoken, participated in the debate, and we need a very regulated. Now, let me emphasize, there is a need for this industry. A large number of my constituents cannot get conventional loans. They cannot walk up to one of our banks and qualify. Many of our undocumented individuals have difficulty using our more traditional banks. But we don't need to take advantage of people that need this resource. So let's allow them to have a viable business, make a reasonable return, but no, the 500% interest, the refusal to allow them to pay off the loan if they want to early. So it needs a good scrubbing. It needs good state control. We need a statewide bill.
Thank you.
So, Senator, we'll give you this last 60 seconds to tell the folks at home why you deserve another term in the Senate.
Well, I'm asking for people to return me to Austin because I have the experience, the knowledge, and the passion to make a difference. You know, getting elected is just one component. Obviously, I've got that pretty much down. It would appear in years past. But the election is just the first step. It's what you do with that responsibility. My office belongs to the people I represent. My seniority belongs to the people I represent. I will play a role of trying to shape and mold the legislative session with a new lieutenant governor, 8 new senators. I promise you, my seniority experience will make a difference. And it's not for John Whitmire. It's for the people of Senate District 15, and I would suggest the greater Houston area. I have the passion and experience to make a difference on behalf of the people if I'm fortunate to be sent back to Austin on their behalf.
Well, thank you so very much, Senator, and stay tuned at home for our next candidate.
Hey, and I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'm speaking at other events.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back to the League of Women Voters Education Fund Conversation with the Candidates. We want to remind everyone at home that all of the candidates on the ballot were invited, and those who you see at the studio tonight took us up on our offer. The next candidate we have is Miss Rita Lucido, who's running for Texas Senate District 17. Miss Lucido, welcome. Tell the folks at home why you decided to run for the Texas Senate.
I will. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. My name is Rita Lucido, as you said, and I had been living here in Harris County for 35 years. I came here to go to law school at the University of Houston, and I've been a practicing lawyer for 31 years. I, in addition to practicing law, I've had this great opportunity in our community to serve on the board of a number of nonprofit organizations. When I was a very young lawyer, I was on the board of the Houston Area Women's Center. I've also been on the board of Avance Education Services, Diverse Works. I've started 2 statewide nonprofits, and most recently I was chair of the board of Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast. And my experience in working in the community with a lot of people of divergent backgrounds and opinions and thoughts coming together to solve problems and to address problems in our community was wonderful. It was really a gift to me. And I sadly see that lacking in our Texas legislature. I see that instead of having real policy conversations and really talking about what's going to work best for Texans, they take up issues that aren't really advancing our economy or helping our kids be prepared to be productive citizens. And so I decided that I wanted to run for this position to take to the voters of Senate District 17 an alternative way of thinking about things, that we can actually have common sense conversations about policy, about infrastructure, about education, and we can get down to voting and making progress in the state, because I think that Texas is a great state and we live in a great part of the state, one of the most prosperous parts of the state, but we need to live up to that promise of Texas. And I see a lot of our citizens not getting the opportunities and a lot of our kids not getting the education that they should. So I decided to take this task on and run for State Senate District 17.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback off of Darrell's statement earlier. The viewers should know that these invitations were only issued this week. We had another show that was scheduled and did not make. And so I appreciate the candidates coming, knowing that their schedules are so full right now. But again, the invitations were only issued a few days ago. I want to ask a voter's guide question of you, because y'all get very little space to respond there, and that is, the last legislative session took steps to address the issue of state funding for mental health services, resulting in Texas moving from 49th to 45th nationally. What will you do to build on the progress and ensure that Texas have access to mental health care services?
Well, obviously, it has to do with funding. I mean, we're not going to get a bunch of people to come volunteer and help do mental health services to some of our fellow Texans who need that help. 45th isn't acceptable for this great state. We have a bounty of resources, and there are also federal dollars that have not just been left on the table, but sent to other states that could have helped provide some mental health services to our neighbors, to the people that we see on the streets, to the people that we encounter every day who need help with their mental illness. We are paying millions of dollars in jailing these folks who really have no other, whose main problem at least is that they are mentally ill, and we're using our jails as hospitals. I think the one thing we can do is come up with a uniquely Texas solution to take advantage of some of the federal dollars that would provide additional health care and, in answer to your question, mental health care for a lot of folks in this state. And I think it's just a shame that we have refused to take those dollars up. There was a plan last session that was put forth by a very smart, responsible state representative from Katy, Dr. John Zerwas, that got nowhere. Dr. Zerwas didn't have a Senate sponsor for his bill, but I'd be a Senate sponsor to try to pick up some of those federal dollars to take care of our fellow Texans.
Thank you. Darrell?
Ms. Lucido, what would you say are your top 3 priorities?
I'm certainly concerned about our education system. As we all know, or most people know, that in 2011, the legislature slashed our education budget by $5.4 billion, which resulted in class sizes increasing for many, many schools in this state, and teachers being laid off. Important TEA grant programs like for all-day pre-K, for at-risk students who were at risk of dropping out were slashed to the bone. In 2013, those funds were not fully restored. They were restored somewhat, but there was no accounting for the growth in our public school enrollment, which had, of course, gone up. And so one of my top priorities is education, that we have to adequately fund education. The Texas Constitution requires that the legislature creates a fair and equal system of funding our education system and providing education for all Texas students. We've had hundreds of school districts sue our state because of the funding, and those suits have now been decided at the trial level, and I'm very concerned that issue is going to get kicked down the road and not taken up this coming legislative session because there's going to be a call to wait until the Texas Supreme Court has ruled. So I would like to see us do the job that we'd be sent there to do and pick up education, take care of it, and make some changes to our education funding. Another issue for me, and it's very important, is transportation. Senate District 17 has two of the busiest, most congested roadways in the state that are smack dab in the middle of it. We got Loop 610 West and Highway 59, and not to mention the Katy Freeway. The people in Senate District 17 deserve to have some innovation. They deserve to have some answers as to why they sit in traffic sweltering and frustrated that they cannot get to their business. The cost to Texas citizens with our outdated transportation system is millions of dollars. So transportation is hugely important to me, and I think that Senate District 17 deserves some innovation and some real conversation about what we can do about our transportation system. So those are two of my very top priorities.
Okay.
Another voter's guide question. Do you support regulation of payday and auto title loan lenders?
Yes, absolutely. As I say, Texas was a state of debtors. As I remember from Texas history, that a lot of debtors came from, I think, Tennessee to found our state because we had some lax rules on being a debtor. But you can't saddle someone with those kinds of interest rates and those kinds of unfair assessment of fees and expect people to be productive and to take care of their families and do what they need to do to pay back their debts. They need some regulation. They're predatory, and I think that, for example, the city of Houston has been able to come up with a solution, or at least some regulation of them that would tie how much could be charged to the credit score of the person and the income of the person in order to not overburden people and just get them in a place where they are damaged by taking out a loan that they thought would be helpful to them.
Thank you. Darrell?
You talked a little bit before about the need for public education. In what ways do you see your experience working in the nonprofit sector and the needs of the state sort of working together? What creative ideas do you think we may be able to take advantage of here in the state?
Well, the things that I have seen in my work in nonprofits is that a well-run nonprofit makes a plan, their governing board makes them stick to the plan and execute the plan under with responsible goals. And I see that Texas doesn't really make plans on education. It seems to me that the legislature goes up there, they're given an estimate of how much money they can spend, which in the past, as we know, has not always been correct, and they figure out what they're going to do without thinking generations in the future. And that's our duty. We need to be planning. We need to be taking responsibility for the job that we were sent up there to do and having some strict governance on what we were doing, what we're doing. You know, we are going to have some excess revenue this coming legislative session. With the great bounty that we've been blessed with in Texas, it's creating revenue. And that gives us a great opportunity to do some planning and to set some priorities. So I hope this coming legislative session we will take the tasks seriously and actually see that we have some excess funds and some funds that we can do some good planning on and do some reform. And I know that we need to do some additional reform on the school testing. That was taken up last session, but we can do more. So I just hope that the legislature will be a little more responsible with the job that they've been told to do. And it's something that I want to work on, certainly.
You know, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to give you an opportunity to tell the voters anything you wanted to tell them that we didn't ask you about. If you'll look into that camera, you'll be talking to the voters.
Okay, thank you. Well, I certainly would appreciate the support of the voters in Senate District 17. You know, Senate District 17 is one of the most well-educated Senate districts in the state. 40% of us have a college education as opposed to 20% of the state, the average in the state. And I believe that is because someone invested in us. Someone in the state of Texas, when we were coming up, gave us a chance. We need to do that same sort of thing for our kids who are about to enter pre-K and need that head start to be ready for first grade. We need to give those same chances to the kids who are about ready to drop out and to keep them in school so they'll be productive members of society. Senate District 17 deserves to have someone in Austin who cares about the transportation system and cares about their everyday life as they try to get from work to home. Those are some of the priorities that I've taken on and the things that I think are important. I certainly hope that I would have the vote of voters in Senate District 17, and I really appreciate the time tonight from the League of Women Voters to let me speak to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay tuned at home for our next candidate.
It's going to go very fast.
Welcome back to the League of Women Voters Education Fund conversation with the candidates. Tonight we're speaking with Texas Senate District 17 candidates. Our next candidate is Mr. David Courtney. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And what made you decide to run for the Senate?
Well, I feel that just in general there has been a shortage of progressive voices in politics in this state, and I believe that it was necessary to put a more progressive slant on things in terms of the public dialogue. And remember, of course, that since I'm a Green Party candidate, I'll say right now that I'm not going to win. But the main important point here is not why I'm not going to win, but the question why it's important for the voters to vote for me. The reason is actually quite simple. In this country, we've seen a Republican Party which has moved so far to the right they've gone off to Never Never Land. As a response to this, as a tactical matter, the Democratic Party has shifted its ideological center of gravity from center to right. Now, that's a very natural thing to do in terms of strategy for winning the elections. The presumption of the Democratic Party was that they've got the progressive vote sewed up, and that by occupying the middle and near right part of the political spectrum that was vacated by the Republican Party, then they're in a better position to win elections. That's a reasonable strategy that if I were a Democratic Party upper level person, I'd probably go with too. However, from the standpoint of developing public policy, this is a very terrible position to work from. When your decisions are only made from dialectics, which deal from a right-wing position to an ultra-right-wing position, that's very much like having a discussion and argument about whether the earth is round and flat like a table or round and flat like a disc. Someone has to be in the mix putting a different view forward. Well, that's the reason why I'm here. It's important to vote for me not because I'm going to win, but because of something very simple. In this state, elections are routinely won and lost by 1 or 2%. Therefore, it only means that I need to get 1, 2, and if I should get 10%, that would be amazing. That would really shake things up in this state. So remember, it's a question of running not to win, but in order to influence public policy. The object being by putting a progressive voice in and allowing the people to vote for a progressive voice, and not just vote for progressivism, but saying that they are not happy with the present structure. Then this gives a real position to make a change in terms of public policy.
Very good. What? Let's just say you did win.
Yes.
What would your top 3 priorities be?
Infrastructure and trying to maintain a balance between public and private sector.
Darrell?
And you made this decision to run. What are your qualifications? What makes you qualified to be the next senator for?
Basically a political guerrilla. I'm not attached to anybody. I don't owe anybody anything, which, as we all know, is the major problem with our political system today. People owe too many favors to too many of the wrong people, and I don't owe anybody anything. And this allows the people basically to have someone who's going to stand up for them and not just some corporate interest or some other special interest group.
Knowing that you're not going to win,
Yes.
we'd still like to know
Okay.
what your opinion is of regulating payday and auto title loan lenders.
Yes, remember when I was a child, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, usury was against the law, and these laws have been relaxed over the years so that things that were illegal for a very large part of our history suddenly became legal. And surprise, 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 we're now beginning to realize why they were illegal to begin with. So to say that I believe that they should be regulated is putting it mildly. I believe we should reinstate some very, very aggressive usury laws.
Thank you. Darrell?
So, tell us a little bit more about you, the person.
Me, the person.
Where you're from.
Okay. I'm a native Houstonian, born in St. Joseph's Hospital. My early training was in engineering, but then I switched to the arts. My field is in music, specifically on Indian music, for which most of the books that I've written, I have about 11 books that have been written in about 60 or 70 different publications in various journals, most of which are on the topic of Indian music. In the process, I spent many, many years living in India. My wife is Indian. My son was born there. This also has given me a very, very strong perspective on culture, and not in an academic standpoint, but really, a real personal feeling of cultural differences and what it's like. And I feel that's very important in this state because, like it or not, nobody wants to talk about it, but we have to really think about how we are going to move into a post-Anglo society. We can do it in a very messy way, or we can do it in a clean way. Hopefully, I believe my background as being both a ethnic minority as well as an ethnic majority would give me a perspective and allow me to make decisions that would work for the betterment of everybody in this potentially stressful transition.
I'm going to ask another one of our voters'
Yes.
guide questions.
Yes.
The last legislative session took steps to address the issue of state funding for mental health services,
Yes.
resulting in Texas moving from 49th to 45th
Mm-hmm.
nationally. If you were elected,
Okay.
what would you do to build on this progress and ensure that Texans have access to mental health care services?
Well, first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, one of my major emphasis was on infrastructure. And unfortunately, when it comes to mental health, our infrastructure is woefully inadequate. The result being that the police and courts have been forced into, in many cases, being the first responder for mental health issues, which they are not qualified to do, nor were they ever supposed to deal with it. So that's one of the first things we need to do. We need to increase the infrastructure, and I might add that this should be done in the public sector, not the private sector, because we've seen what has happened with private sector prisons. But we should really look into beefing up the state hospital system.
Thank you. Darrell?
Public education funding. Are we spending enough? Are we not spending enough?
I think we're just not spending it wisely. I think we need to assess the way we need to do things. And one of the things, as long as we have religious agendas and political agendas muddying the water, we're never going to be able to get things straight in terms of how things are done. We need to look in terms of how our State Board of Education is doing things. We need to think of why they're doing things. We need to rationalize things. And possibly we should think in terms of the nature of school systems and whether they are structured correctly. We have many school systems that have been structured in order to comply with the various voting acts regulations in the 60s. And of course, it was very, very necessary. But now that we are moving into a period where a lot of those issues are not as intense as they have, maybe we need to re-examine the way school boards are put together. I should say school districts, the way school districts are put together.
You have some rural counties
Yes.
and counties that have agriculture, which
Mhm.
is our second largest industry in Texas. If you're elected, what are your plans for ensuring agriculture's ability to continue to prosper and grow?
Well, that's always a difficult question. I think one of the first things we need to look at is, are we talking about prospering because of a basic organic structure? Are we talking about agribusinesses prospering because of government subsidies and corporate welfare? I would like to see more support for small family farms and real people farms, and we should re-examine the necessity of corporate welfare for larger agribusinesses. And one of the things we may also need to look at is in terms of water. Water is becoming more and more of an issue. However, I feel that that is something that would be more a topic for the Agricultural Commissioner.
Thank you. Darrell?
Being that you would be a third-party candidate if you were to
Yes.
win, how would you work across both of the other party lines?
As I said, my plans would be to be a political guerrilla, representing the people always and working with either side of the aisle according to what seemed to be the expedient. In other words, I would choose my battles very, very carefully.
Is the size of Texas state government okay as it is? Should it grow? Should it be smaller?
Depends on what one considers government. If we talk about the government actually as it is, I'd say it's possibly okay. Maybe it could be a little bit bigger, but I think we also need to think in terms of the public sector, which is actually different from the government. We really need, as a nation and as a state, we need to have more of a balance between public and private sector. The problem with the private sector is that everything that they're doing is profit first and whatever business they're in second. When you have an entire nation and an entire state which is irrationally focused on the private sector, then you have everybody doing everything when that's not really what they want to do. It's always secondary in their priorities. When you have a robust public sector, you have people who are actually in the business to do whatever it is they're doing. As an example, newspapers, they're not in the news business, they're in the advertising business. Our prison industry is not in the rehabilitation business. It's in the business of filling up with cells with as many bodies as possible in order to make a profit. In other words, by coming up with a comfortable balance between public and private sector, we can have a much more balanced economy and a much more effective governance of the state.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Courtney, we want to give you this time to talk into the camera and tell the folks at home why you deserve their vote.
Okay, as I have said before, a lot of people who are watching, a lot of people out there are not planning to go to the polls. You're not going to the polls because you feel that what is the point? There's the Democrats, the Republicans, they're playing the very same game, so why to go to the polls? I'm saying go to the polls, vote for me. You may not be heard if you call your representatives. You may not be heard if you write your representatives. But if you go to the polls and vote for a third party, hopefully me or other Greens, I guaranteed you will be heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Mr. Courtney. And
Thank you very much.
at home, stay tuned for the next candidate.
Thank you.
Thanks.